Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. The first hadith of Arba'un An-Nawawi. عن أمير المؤمنين أبي حفص عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه قال: سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول: إنما الأعمال بالنيات وإنما لكل امرئ ما نوى، فمن كانت هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله، ومن كانت هجرته للدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة ينكحها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. I heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, actions are judged by intention, so each man will have what he intended. Thus, he whose migration hijrah was to Allah and His Messenger, his migration is to Allah and His Messenger. But he whose migration was for some worldly thing he might gain, or for a wife he might marry, his migration is that for which he migrated. This was reported by Bukhari and Muslim. So the format we are going to take for discussing every hadith from 1 to 42 hadith is going to be as follows. We are going to give recitation and translation of the hadith. Number 2, authenticity of the hadith. Number 3, the context of the hadith / the narrator of the hadith. Number 4, meaning and application of the hadith. And lastly, practical ways to apply the hadith. We have already done the first one, so we are going to move to the authenticity of the hadith. This hadith is graded as Sahih. Islam is the only religion that has this peculiarity of having isnad, chains of narration. لولا الإسناد لقال من شاء ما شاء. Were it not for isnad, chain of narration, anyone would have said whatever they wanted. Create historical events without any chains of narration. So when we say a hadith is sahih, which is the highest level of authenticity, it means that the person who narrates this hadith is someone we know back and forward, and he's trustworthy, and he has a very good memory. And the chain of narration from point A to point B doesn't have any problem. Z had from Y, Y had from X, and so on until they reached to A. Generation after generation, these people had the hadith from generation of the example tabi'in, who had it from the generation of the atba'u tabi'in, who had it from the sahaba, and who had it from the prophet directly. The next one is there's no hidden defect in the hadith. And lastly, there is no oddity or strangeness in the narration narrated from one or few of the narrators, which goes against the narration of the mainstream narrators that have better and stronger memorization capacity. These are what makes a hadith sahih, which is the highest level. We have other grades than that, and we'll discuss it when we get there. The meaning of this hadith. Scholars say that this hadith is one of the 3 hadith that covers every aspect of the religion. Every action is based on intention. So if we take the aspect of Aqidah, it means that every deed you do must stem from sincerity. You are doing it for the sake of Allah, and we know that this is one of the combo for a deed to be accepted, that you are doing it for the sake of Allah, not for worldly gain, not for praises. So any deed that is not done for the sake of Allah is not accepted by Allah. And this stands to reason, because I don't think a person should pay for services not rendered to him. You should go to that person that you rendered the services to him and then ask him for payment, and not a different person. And that is why this is the foundation in terms of Aqidah. We got this from وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ إِمْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. A person only gets what he intends for. And in terms of ibadah, worship, it separates the outward actions we do, even though outwardly they may look similar. Fasting in Ramadan looks similar to fasting outside of Ramadan. It's all abstinence of not eating and drinking from dawn to dusk. What separates fasting in Ramadan and outside of it is intention. Zuhur prayer and Asr prayer are all 4 rak'at. What separates them is intention. You might even forget to pray Zuhur prayer and remember to pray it the next day, which means you're praying 2 Zuhur prayer in that day. What separates Zuhur A and Zuhur B is intention, and obviously intention is not spoken out loud. We'll explain more on that later. This also means that if you were to start praying for the sake of Allah, the first 2 rak'at, you start praying for the sake of Allah, and the last 2 rak'at, you do them for people praise so that they will say something good about you, for worldly gain, then that prayer becomes void and null, because you have divided that prayer, which is shirk, partnership, between 2 partners, Allah, which was the beginning, and another person or people praise, and that becomes void, simply because prayer is one consolidated action. But it might be different when it comes to charity. Charity, you might give $2, $3 to someone in need for the sake of Allah, and then when giving, the third time you're giving out, pulling out your wallet and giving out, someone praises you, and then you do it for that praise, you continue doing it for that praise. The first 2 times you do it for the sake of Allah, Allah will accept it because they are not connected to the last time. They are unconsolidated actions. But basically, this all points to the fact that definitely actions are judged by intentions. That even means that whatever creed or belief system you come to Allah, that is not the rules of engagement He set for you as His servant, He won't accept it, because what? Actions are judged by intention. So for the فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ can be changed to فَمَنْ كَانَتْ صَلَاتُهُ, whoever does prayer for someone else's sake, whoever does charity for someone else's sake, Allah will not accept it. And that is why in the last part of the hadith it mentions that whoever makes hijrah, which is a form of ibadah, making migrations, moving from a place of kufr, a place infested by discipline, going to a place with freedom to practice your religion and faith. So if you do it just because of worldly gain, or for a woman you want to marry, then you just get that and Allah will not reward you for it. It also applies to mu'amala, or business relations, or marriage relations. This by default is quite different from the other 2. This does not require intention. Intention is just basically doing something with a set mind and purpose. You do not require to say something out loud. لو كلفنا الله عملا بلا نية لكان من التكليف ما لا يطاق. If Allah made it in a way that we would have to do actions without intentions, then we wouldn't have able to do so, because it's an impossibility. Every action has an intention. The reason you are moving towards the door, even though you are thinking of something else, is because you had the intention of closing that door. So on a subconscious level, intention works without that presentness, but that presentness, that additional presentness of what you are doing it with purpose, makes it a whole lot better, and it maximizes the reward. So when you hear Allah mention that if you do an action you will get a reward between 10 and 700, one of the things that are looked at, the factors looked at, is the intention, the presentness of mind when praying, when giving charity. That presentness to do it for the sake of Allah changes the whole equation. But this, we're talking about default. But when it comes to doing it completely for someone else's sake, not Allah, that deed is not accepted. Why? Because actions are based on intention, and if the foundation is not good, it won't stand. Particularly if you do it for someone else's sake, as we see in the hadith of the first 3 people that will enter hell: the Quran reciter, the rich person who gives in charity, and the brave man who went to war, jihad. But all of them did it for praises and worldly gain. Not only will you not be rewarded, but you will be punished, as in this hadith. Mu'amala does not require intention, but like I said, intention is something that is quite ingrained in us. So what it means that it doesn't require intention. You sell something to me and I buy it and I go my way. You can't come back later and say I didn't make the intention of selling it to you. It doesn't work that way. In Mu'amala, it's quite free, and you can't say I divorced my wife and then you say, I didn't intend to divorce my wife. That's quite different from when it comes to ibadah and aqidah. The mu'amala is quite free, and by default it does not require intention in the context of presentness, as I've mentioned, but adding intention to it. And now we are moving to the last aspect, the practical ways to apply this hadith. Adding intention to it makes it an ibadah. For example, walking barefoot is something that is halal in the context of mu'amala or permitted things. It's something that is permissible to just walk barefooted. But if you were to walk barefooted with the intention that you are doing it because there's actually a hadith that states that sometimes we should walk barefooted, you get reward for it. Same goes for eating. Just because you eat or you go to the bathroom, that doesn't mean you should get reward for it. But if you go to the bathroom, applying the etiquettes of going to the bathroom, eating, because Allah mentioned kulu washrabu, eat and drink, and knowing that you actually being able to defecate is also a blessing, then that becomes worship. So you can change things that are permitted and not a reward attached to it to become worship. But most importantly is the first thing we mentioned, which is in terms of aqidah, making sure your aqidah is quite good, and then in terms of ibadah, which separates a deed from another deed, like the prayer example we give. And last but most important is, if you do an act of worship, not for the sake of Allah, but for praises or worldly gain, not only are you not going to be rewarded for it, but you are going to be punished based on the hadith of the first three people that will enter hellfire. So build your actions on the right intentions in aqidah, ibadah, and mu'amala for plus bonuses. These are the few of the things that we can extract from this hadith, and this hadith has undergone many explanations, some hundreds of pages, but with this, inshallah, you would have the first hadith of An-Nawawi, and you can ingrain it in your life. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.